Welcome to BizJet TV. My name is Fabrizio Poli, and today we're going to be talking about the recent Global Business Aviation Accident Report that's just issued, where they looked at the accidents between 2010 and 2020, and I'll be discussing what's happening. So let's get straight into it. There were 300 crashes during this 10-year period, and 317 people died. These are just the jets. If we look at the turboprops, there were 610 crashes, which with 702 people dying in these crashes. Now, the interesting stat in this is when we hone in on the difference between the privately operated aircraft and the commercially operated aircraft. Those are 135 and Part 91. On the jet front, 70% of the crashes were aircraft that were operated privately, and in the turboprop, it was 60% of the crashes were due to aircraft that were operated privately. So the other factor is 2/3 of the private jets are in the United States or registered in the United States. So obviously, when you look at the tables, you're going to see more crashes in the US than outside. That does not mean that flight safety in the US is not safer than outside. It's just that there are more aircraft. So now let's look at the whole situation here with the private compared to commercial. Now, I consult with a lot of people and calling me wanting to buy a private jet and whatever. And recently I've had some people contact me and talking about how much is it going to cost to run, budget to buy the aircraft, etc., etc. And what I'm very, very worried about is that some of these people coming onto the market, and this is not a new thing, it's always been like that, are thinking that they're going to come in and do things on the cheap. So now, bear in mind, 70% of crashes happen with privately operated aircraft. So here you are, this person has made some money, and they suddenly watch a few videos on YouTube and read up on a few things and suddenly become a private jet expert. So they go out and they buy an aircraft for $600,000, $700,000, $800,000, whatever it may be, because they think they're being clever. And then instead of hiring 2 pilots or 3 pilots to fly the airplane for them, they just hire 1. And this is a very old airplane, so you're not going to find someone that wants to advance in their career, or someone that's a good pilot wanting to fly something with modern technology in that. So you're not going to hire someone good, and these people are going to hire someone on the cheap, so that even narrows it even more. And you're not going to be finding someone that's well trained or well experienced or a good stick. So when you do things like this, this is what causes this 70% thing happening. When you're hired by a company which is operating on Part 135 certificate, or AOC as we call it here in England, the pilots have to go, they're professional pilots first of all, and they have to go through certain type of training. The standards are higher. I'm not saying you shouldn't operate your aircraft privately. Operating an aircraft privately is a great solution. There are less restrictions, but you should never compromise on 3 things. Never buy a cheap airplane because you're trying to save money. Don't compromise on the maintenance. Say, I'll do that next week, or I'll go to this place because it's cheaper than that place. And don't compromise on the pilots. Oh, I'll hire him because he's cheaper than the other guy, or let's just give him that training session and not the other one. You really need to look at the minimum requirement of training. And the manufacturers, when they do sell you an aircraft, they give you so many simulator sessions a year. I would buy extra sim time for your pilots. Because, at the end of the day, when you're flying a private jet, you're flying into, very often, places you've never been to before. When you fly for the airlines, you're flying 20, 30 routes. You're trained on those routes. There's all sorts of handouts that the company give to the pilots about the different airports. And so, you've got a whole briefing about so-and-so airport, and you read up on that before you go to that airport. Or you maybe even trained in a simulator, that particular approach. When I trained to fly into Kathmandu, for example, we had to do special training. I remember doing special training for Salzburg, for Sion in Switzerland, St. Moritz, also to land at Lugano in Switzerland, or Aspen. There's special training that you can do, and I suggest that if you're going to be going into those airports, that you send your pilots to do that extra training. But in any case, give your pilots that extra training. So, there's nothing bad in operating privately. The other factor that causes the accidents with the privately operated aircraft are the pilot owners. Now, these are people which aren't professional pilots. When I say they may have a professional pilot certificate, but if they have never worked as a professional pilot, they buy an aircraft because they like to fly. They fly for business. They use the airplane, and they combine, let's say, their hobby with their they get their business to pay for their hobby, basically, which is flying. But, when you're flying an airplane, you need to be there in the cockpit. You need to get the adequate training. You should be flying at a professional level, even though you're not a professional. And not many of these business people have that kind of discipline. And so they cut corners. They're in a rush, or they're distracted because they're thinking about their business deal. And this compromises flight safety. And so hence, you get the safety record, go up. And this is what gives private aviation a bad rap as far as safety is concerned. I mean, the safety record in private aviation compared to the airlines is 5 times more chances of crashing on a private jet than you do if you're flying with the airlines. And one of the factors that drives this statistic completely out the window is the fact that, you can't fly a United Airlines 737 if you're not a professional pilot and you haven't gone through their selection and training. While with a private jet, you can go out and buy yourself a Citation 500, get yourself a type rating on the airplane, and off you go. I mean, I heard a horror story a year and a half ago about this guy that went to America from Europe, bought himself a Falcon 50, and a week later came back type rated. Now, how do you get a Falcon 50 type rating in a week? And this guy's not a professional pilot. Now, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And just to add more to that story, and I think I've told this story before on BizJet TV, the guy that checked him out, so the check airman, had never been in a simulator in his life. So, you can imagine the training and the checking on for that guy to get his type rating. So, you hear all these stories in private aviation. So if you're watching this and you're thinking of buying a private jet, please don't go cheap on acquiring the jet. Please don't go cheap on the pilots. Don't do things like, I'll hire one pilot full time and I'll just bring in some freelance guys when I need to fly, because I don't want to pay 2 guys to sit on standby. Don't cut corners like that, because you want quality up front. And also there's a factor that, a private jet needs to stay private. You don't want freelance guys coming in, flying your jet, taking you from A to B, C to D and asking questions and seeing what's going on. You don't want that to happen. I mean, your business needs to stay private, your jet needs to stay private, and the only way to do that with your crew is to hire crew and keep them for a long time. And if you want to keep crew for a long time, you've got to train them, you've got to pay them well, you've got to give them time off, you've got to look after them. And a number of friends of mine working for a number of private individuals, and they've been there 10, 15 years. Why? One friend of mine's been with the company 23 years. Why? Because they treat him well. They give him extra training, they give him holidays and good salary and everything. He's got time off with his family and that, and the guy's been sticking around for 23 years. That guy's going to keep his mouth shut. He didn't see what was going on in the back. Doesn't go out telling people where he's taking the boss, etc., etc. These are all factors which are important to consider besides the flight safety aspect. So anyway, overall, interesting to see. Now let's just go into the reason why there are more turboprop crashes than jet crashes. A turboprop is a bit more difficult to control, especially when there's an engine failure. Turboprops are slower, so some people do prefer, especially privately owned, to buy a turboprop. This is why the single engine turboprops, which are getting faster, are getting more popular than the twin engine things. I mean, King Airs, for example, tend to crash a lot, because when one of those engines fail, then you get that effect, that yaw effect. And if you haven't done enough training in the simulator and know how to catch that and manage that whole thing with the aircraft yawing and controlling, keeping the aircraft under control, working the checklist, if you're having to do this all on your own and you haven't received the proper training, chances are this thing's going to crash. And it's not just for the amateur pilot, also for the professional pilot. Having another guy sitting in the right seat, helping you out with the checklist, doing the radios for you while you control this airplane with one engine, it's just going to take a lot of workload off you. Your mind can then focus on controlling the aircraft while the other guy runs the checklist and does the radios. It just makes life a lot easier. And you don't have to necessarily have a super Top Gun guy in the right hand seat helping you out. It can even be a young flight instructor at a flight school that knows how to read checklists, knows how to do the radio, even just that, and you pay that guy some money to sit there with you. It will help in an emergency situation. It will take that that load off you. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of turboprop crashes more than jet crashes. The jet's a bit more easier to maneuver with single engine operations than that, but the jet is faster, so you need to think fast. for the jet. So overall, I would say, these crashes happen, and it's all about preventing them from happening. And so you prevent by training, by doing the maintenance properly, by buying the right aircraft, all these factors. So I do recommend, if you are looking to buy a private jet, that you do consult with an aviation professional like myself or another aviation advisor that's out there to be able to guide you through the process and give you the right recommendation on what to buy, and not only on buying the aircraft, but how you're going to manage this aircraft, the pilots you're going to hire, who's going to manage the airplane for you, the maintenance. All these aspects are really, really important. Don't think that you've got a good deal on buying the aircraft and then you mess up on the hiring of the pilots, or you mess up on the management of the aircraft. All these elements are really, really important to keep you safe. And very often, if you're sitting in the back, you're not going to see the safety happen. And if you don't see the safety happen, then the safety is happening. It's a bit like with security. If you've got guys shooting all the time, shooting at people that were trying to kill you, then obviously your security team is not a very good security team, because you want those guys to prevent these things from happening. Well, it's the same with flight training, with operating a private jet. You want your pilots to avoid taking the airplane into certain situations. That's really important. So anyway, tell me what your take is. Let's get the conversation going here in the comments below. What do you think about these new stats that have just come out? What do you think we need to do to increase flight safety? Any questions that you have, please ping them below. We'll answer them. Or if you want to ping me an email and schedule an appointment, you can do. That'd be great. Give us a thumbs up here and subscribe to BizJet TV. And that's all from Fabrizio Party on this great episode of BizJet TV. And I'll see you on the next one.